think about where we're coming from, we've talked about EBS. We've talked about EBS as a volume. We've talked about instant store, and we said that EBS is basically a block store, right? And we said instant store and EBS, they're similar. The only difference is that instant store, when you more or less like restart the machine, um, or basically when you stop the machine, you lose the data, right? And then from there we talked about EFS, which we said it's really for sharing, right? File sharing. So if you needed more than one EC2 instance, remember that EBS, they're backed by AZs, right? So whenever you're creating an EBS volume, for example, you have to specify the availability zone. That restriction is not there for um, um, EFS, because EFS is spread across multiple availability zones, right? So when you when you create an EFS volume, you can mount it from multiple EC2 instances. And then from there, we started talking about object storage, right? So we did S3. We looked at how we could do like our own small website hosting. We did things like permission, like how to secure your S3 bucket. We did things like, creating access points. There's still more to S3, honestly. But at this level, I think the knowledge we have is good for a start. But think about it. We've mentioned these four types of storage, right? But they are all in AWS. They are all in AWS. But you should understand that the role we play as cloud engineers or cloud, if you ever work in the cloud, sometimes you find people who are they're starting their business, they just want to start it in the cloud. But for the most part, some people are already on premise and they are evaluating the cloud. So they're still trying to make decisions if they'll move to the cloud, if the cloud is, and sometimes during that phase, sometimes they operate in an hybrid mode, more or less like keep some things in the cloud, keep some things on premise, and it's just a way for them to be able to gauge, like measure, more or less like create a timeline for them to do that migration, right? That's really what we're going to be talking about today. So hybrid and edge delivery. And why this is separate is because it's not just about S3, it's not about EBS, it's about how AWS powers that, how AWS makes that to happen, right? Cool. So um, so when you now think about the objective today, basically, we're looking at hybrid solutions, first of all. So hybrid in the sense that you're on premise and you also want to keep data in the cloud. Maybe you want to even offload your complete storage to the cloud, right? Because you don't want to like do it from your on premise. We'll also see, okay, think about you've been on premise all the while, and then you have like terabytes, petabytes of data. Now you want to move to the cloud. Do you want to use the internet to transfer that data? We'll see the options that are available and what AWS is doing around that. So storage gateway is really one of the things we're going to see in terms of hybrid network. And then we'll see CDN itself. So we've seen buckets, right? We've seen that we could create like a static website from an S3 bucket. But I think CDN, CloudFront, takes it way further, and it just makes it really better in terms of like how it keeps the data in your edge locations. And there's a lot of caching that you just get out of the box and those benefits. And then if we could get to global accelerator, we're going to talk about it. And I think I've mentioned before that transfer acceleration is different from global accelerator. Sometimes even me at the early stage, those things were confusing, but I'm hoping that you'll understand the difference as we go along the line. So like I mentioned, the challenges is really that the organizations we're talking about, they have like on-premise infrastructure, right? That they want to move to the cloud. And in some cases, they actually want the migration to be gradual. If you're already built in the on-premise, it's not going to work for you to just wake up and move to the cloud. There has to be like a transitioning phase, more or less like you're moving the data gradually, or you have to find a way to move your data. It just depends on how long you have to do that transition, right? So, and in some cases, you're basically bridging. You bridge for a while and then you do the transition, right? Um, and the benefit is that you can actually leverage the cloud scale, right? And you can also you can even maintain your existing workflow, but you can leverage the scale that the cloud gives you. So another thing I also want to point out to you, as much as the cloud is there, there are people till today who have like their on-premise system still working, but they get services from the cloud. There are people who they pretty much use on-premise, but maybe they keep a lot of things in S3, right? S3 could just be the only AWS service they are using. So there are people that operate like that. And there are people who are just fully in the cloud. Okay, so we'll see storage gateway, DataSync, Snow, and then the transfer family and what they do. So that brings us to storage gateway. And honestly, I need you to get this concept very well, because sometimes these things are similar, but you just need to know exactly where one plays a role. Okay. So storage gateway, whenever you see, if you ever hear anything about hybrid, so if someone is talking to you and asking you about hybrid way of storing data, it's really storage gateway. That's the only way in AWS for you to do it. The whole idea is that you can more or less like be on premise, right? And choose the cloud for your storage. And you would see the different patterns that you can operate. Sometimes you can completely be in the cloud. Your data will completely be in the cloud, but you're on premise, right? You just more or less like you can mount it just the way you have like directories, right? In your local machine, you can have directories that are completely mounted from an S3 bucket, but that data is actually in the cloud. You can pull it out, but it's there. It's like in the cloud. You're just referencing them from your local machine, right? So Storage gateway is really about hybrid storage, meaning you are using all the things that we're talking about, with the exception of instance store. I think I told you that instance store is a hardware, is attached to the machine. So when you think about EBS, S3, NFS, EFS, um, those are storage, the hybrid, like that storage gateway can breach. Okay, and we'll see how it integrates with your existing infrastructure. So if you think about it, there are really three types. There is file storage gateway, there is volume storage gateway, and there is tape gateway. And we're going to see what that looks like. So you need to understand the infrastructure. I'm not going to go into details, like into each one of them, but I'm sharing an infrastructure, like a diagram here, just for you to see how it works. So think about on the left, there is an on-premise. So someone is already doing business, like he's already on-prem, right? He has his own machine, everything is working. They have a lot of data that they are storing, and now they are thinking about, okay, why not we more or less like you get storage from the cloud? Maybe they're already reaching limitations around their storage. So this is not compute. This is not networking. It's about they have like a system that works on premise, but instead of like relying on premise, they're like, okay, why not we get storage from the cloud? And that's what storage gateway does basically. Your business is still on premise, but your storage is in the cloud. You're basically storing in the cloud. Okay. So the first example is really file gateway. And honestly, at the CCP level, you're not expected to go into details. But as we grow on, we'll have to build, right? We'll build. You'll see how it works, whether it's on your Windows or your Linux machine. The whole idea is that you can use S3 to more or less like use it from AWS to store your files, even from your on-premise location. And the way it works is that when you push, so there's like a gateway that you're going to install from AWS. You're going to install a gateway. That gateway is inside of AWS and it keeps a cache, right? So what you do from your local on-premise environment is that you connect to the gateway. So once you connect to the gateway, it mounts to your local machine. And from that point, so when you're creating the gateway, you have to give it like a bucket because it uses S3 for all these things. You give it like a bucket. And then in that bucket syncs with your local machine. That's just the idea because you've mounted the storage gateway. So when you push file to it locally, that file is also saved to S3. If there's also a new file in S3, it's saved to your machine. Remember, also let me just mention something. It's not using the space in your machine. So if you had 500 GB, it's not like it's using your 500 GB space. No, but you see those files there. You can see them. It's just like a virtual storage that you can see on your machine. If you needed to pull them over, then you can pull it to your own instance, right? So just think about it that there is like a location you can see that gives you an idea of the files you can make reference to. And if you wanted to use them, you can use them. So that's really fast. And we'll see that it works both for Windows machine and both for Linux machine. So if you think about Windows, for example, I know you're already used to, if you are using Windows machine, you pretty much see like there is like a mount. For those who are very familiar with SMB protocols, you see that you can actually mount like if a drive that is somewhere, right, and then see it. That's exactly how it is. Storage gateway can make that happen, but at the back end, you're basically counting on S3 to store the data. So you save locally. It uses storage gateway, syncs the data to S3. So you're using S3 as a storage, but from on-premise, right? The same. So just think about that concept. It's the same when you think about volumes. Okay, files are files, basically files, but volumes now is imagine you using like a hard disk that is from the cloud. So you can actually, just the way, you know how EBS works, right? The way EBS works, you know that the block storage is actually attached to an EC2 machine, right? So it provides like a block storage for a compute. It's the same way. So storage gateway has an option that is called volume gateway that can give you volume. So the exam is always like that also, and we'll see them when the time comes. But so you can actually have a volume that is backed by an S3. And you can actually take snapshots that are in turn can become EBS snapshot that you can even restore on an EC2 machine if you wanted. So just think about it that one is really file storage, right? So file backed by S3. There is still another one, volume gateway, is also backed by S3. But the way it works is just what is different. You can mount it to your machine, right? So it's like a real block volume. The other one is just files, right? And then there is really tape. Tape is basically so if you have like a backup, like there's really specific devices that use that. But you remember that on-premise, people used to have like virtual tapes where like virtual tape libraries that they use for their backups, right? So if you wanted to replay that and use the cloud, you could use a tape gateway. And what that would just do is that it will use Glacier. And I think we've talked about what Glacier is. Like Glacier is an archiving platform. So you can basically use the tape gateway to more or less like archive your data. So it's like on-premise existing backup, and then you are using the tape gateway to use Glacier from S3. Okay, so those are really the three. But the most important thing you need to take out is really the fact that it's an hybrid setup. So something, your data is on premise. It's not you transferring data now. It's like hybrid. So your data is in the cloud, right? But you're on premise, you're operating on premise, and then you're using the cloud for storage. Okay, let me see what the next slide looks like. So when you think about it, File gateway is basically you're replicating your file servers, right? So content distribution, basically files, whether it's Windows, whether it's Linux, you're just saving files. Volume gateway, like if you wanted, you should have like a database on premise that needs like a volume attached to it. That's not files. Remember, files is just like the way you list files, right? It's just like when you go to S3, you see all those directories. It's different from how volumes work. Volumes are really block storage. Like, so for database, maybe you want to have like create disaster recovery using your on-premise and the cloud. That's where volume gateway comes in. And then tape gateway is basically if you wanted to modernize your backup infrastructure. So you already had the backup that is using like your tape technology on premise, and you wanted to now use the cloud. That's where tape gateway is going to come in. And it's not one or the other. Sometimes, like I've mentioned, some people are using hybrid, like they are processing maybe on premise and then they're storing in the cloud, right? And like I also said, you could also use it for gradual migration. So imagine you creating a gateway and then you are using that to sync your file from on premise to the cloud, just to make sure that if you eventually want to leave, your data is already in S3, or your data is already in S3, whether it's file or volume storage. Okay. And disaster recovery, if it's in AWS, it means that you can change machines, move from one place to the other, or change machines, or move to the cloud, and your data is still in the cloud, right? So because storage gateway, honestly, you don't at this level is advanced. I'm not going to go into details. So just so you know, we're not going to go into the details. You'll see them as time goes on. But the thing is just for you to know that it's hybrid storage, really. So if I go to gateway, for example, at this level, don't worry, it's not something. Not even a lot of people, like I told you, it has to do with on-premise, right? So a lot of people are already in the cloud. So if you're already in the cloud, you may never even work with storage gateway. That's just what it means. But if you start from an on-premise environment, you need storage gateway, right, to do more or less like your hybrid storage. So some people, if you work with a cloud, the company that is already in AWS, you never have to work with storage gateway. But the knowledge is good. You need to have it. So it's really on-premise access to virtually unlimited cloud storage. That's how AWS names it. So if I come here and I say I want to create a gateway, you see the options that I have here, right? So it's a lot of steps, but I'm actually looking for a place where I can actually see the options that I have. Let me see if there is like gateways, create gateway. There's tape gateway, volume gateway, file gateway. Okay, yeah, this is what I was looking for. So if you see file gateway, you're storing S3. The only thing you need to keep track of is really the NFS or SMB protocol, right? SMB Windows. So you're still going to be mounting that part. So the thing is that once you create a file gateway, for example, you have to mount that direction, that part. So you have to mount the storage gateway, whether it's using SMB on the Windows side or using NFS on the Linux side. But it's standard practice, right? And then there is like the tape gateway. There are devices that support this kind of, that uses Glacier. And then there's like volume gateway that you can use for you to mount real volumes in this case. Okay. So at this level, honestly, we would not, for now, we're not going to, but it's straightforward, just so you know. The questions are usually around just if you wanted, once you see hybrid storage, there is no other tool than AWS Storage Gateway. Okay. We're going to do it at some point extensively. Okay. But it's not like what we should focus on now. So we've talked about the use case. We've talked about the use case. So we talked about S3, and now I just mentioned to you that there is a way you can keep like hybrid. So you can utilize the global scale S3 has, and then use your on-premise setup to more or less like create a hybrid storage for yourself, right? So your on-premise, there is like a limitation, but in the cloud, that limitation is not there. So you can breach that. So that's where hybrid comes in. But there are times you just want to sync data. Basically, you just want to transfer data from one point to the other, right? That's where data sync comes in. And like I always tell people that AWS, honestly, it's one of the reasons that I appreciate AWS. People, I don't know, people talk about other platforms, other cloud platforms, but for me, it's really how the names are kind of like, to some extent, you can relate with the names. So data sync is really syncing data. It's different from hybrid here. Okay, it's different from hybrid. Hybrid is keeping both in the on-premise and in the cloud, but data sync is really syncing. Really, you are taking it from one point to the other. So you can see online data transfer service for moving large amounts of data, right? Some of us we've not seen really large data before. Maybe we're dealing with large small data. I've seen really, really large data, and sometimes when you want to move it, that's when you start considering the services that can help you move it fast, right? So that's where data sync comes in. So if you had like, and usually, like I said, this is like the class today is really about hybrid. So on-premise, you can see if you look at the diagram, there is the on-premise infrastructure, right? And now you're planning to move to the cloud, but you have a lot of data in your on-premise setup that needs to be moved. If you want to do that, you are ready to migrate. Now you just want to move. Yeah, you just want to do a quick copy. That's where data sync can help you, right? So transfer to S3, and there's a lot. So you create a data sync service, and then that can allow you transfer to S3, EFS, FSS. for Windows file server, right? And we've talked about all that before, what those are, right? S3 is really object storage. EFS is file, right? If you wanted to move your files to the cloud, you can use DataSync to move your files to EFS. You can also move your objects from your on-premise environment to the cloud using to S3, right? But using the DataSync service. So, like we said, in the past, we talked about NFS SMB protocols. They are still protocols you are going to see, right? Because it's the protocol data sync is built on top, because at the point where you are doing that syncing, you have to connect to the data sync service for it to be able to send your data to the backend services we're talking about, which in this case is S3 FSS, EFS and FSS for Windows. Okay, so there is like an agent. So the way it works is that on premise, right, and then you install the data sync agent, and then the service is already running in AWS. And once there's that connectivity between that agent and the data sync service, then you can begin your migration to the cloud. Okay, so there's encryption in there, there's data integrity validation, you can even do bandwidth throttling if you wanted. And then you can do one thing people that is a bit confusing sometimes, and you see in the exam, is that it's both two ways in terms of either one-time migration or ongoing synchronization. So you can actually do once, just migrate your data, just run it once, or you can set it up in such a way that it can continue to sync your data, right? Just in case you're planning to move, but you're still trying to make sure that whatever you have on premise is in sync with what's in the cloud before you do the cutoff. Okay. So we talked about hybrid gateway, storage gateways, like a gateway to create that hybrid connection. And then there are times you really need to sync, to move data completely. So when you think about moving data, that's where data sync comes in. Okay. So when you think about the difference between the two, one is really hybrid, and whenever you see it at the Cloud Practitioner exams, it's really trying to gauge your knowledge if you know hybrid versus migration. So one is for hybrid storage, the other one is really for data migration, right? Use case for data sync one time or scheduled sync, like I mentioned, but storage gateway is really like ongoing hybrid operations, right? More or less like you're on premise, but you're using the cloud to store your data. And if you think about the data flow for data sync, it's really push data to AWS, right? But for storage gateway, it's bidirectional access. The data, you can access it in S3, you can also access it locally, right? So both sides, you're accessing data and you're syncing almost bidirectional. If you create it locally, it's going to sync to S3. If you push a file in S3, it's going to sync back to your local machine. Okay. If you think about the integration, one is transfer focused, so just push. While the other is really seamless, right? It's more or less like you can have like that storage built into your application, to your existing application. And then when you think about performance, one is really high throughput transfer, right? That's really what it is, to sync data, move data from on-premise to the cloud. And the other one is low latency, cached access, right? So, and we'll see more of these details when we go into it. So when you now think about data sync, you'll now be thinking, yeah, we already have a way for you to move file, but AWS doesn't stop at that. They give you so many options, and that's where the transfer family comes in, right? And you'll be asking, we already have data sync. What is now transfer family? So what you need to think about is really, it's just in this case, remember that data sync, if you look at the previous slide here, really there's so many things that you can move, right? To S3, to EFS, to FSS, right? But when you think about transfer family, it's basically fully managed file transfer service. So it's FTS basically. So I think if you are used to, I don't know how many people have experience with FileZilla, right? So most times you get like a hosting platform, and then you use like a FileZilla, you connect to the FTP server or SFTP server, and then use that to transfer your file, right? So if you ever think of you doing transfer, right, using that FTP file transfer protocol, AWS Transfer Family is the case, because there are people already have like an FTP system already, right? If you wanted to replicate that in the cloud, you can just use the Transfer Family service and then choose which protocol you want to support, and then whoever is connecting to it, whether it's a user, it's a client, wherever they are, in as much as they are complying with the protocol you're using, which is in this case SFTP secure, right, or FTP, they can just push files using that the AWS Transfer Family, right? So it's S3 backed, it's also EFS backed. It has some native integrations like service managed, Active Directory, LDAP, and you can even use your own custom authentication. So when you think about it is really in this case file exchange, right? Because it's really specific to the FTP protocol. So it's really file transfer. Data sync is for syncing, like just large migration. But in this case, you're basically connecting to an FTP server and then using that to push your files, right? And it's also unidirectional. And the way it works is that you pay per protocol, right? Per protocol that you enable. So if you think about the way the diagram is right now, so I think this one I'm going to show you. We won't demo it because it's also like long to demo, but you just need to understand what it does. You create a transfer family, for example, and then from the client, you just need to point at the protocol you're using. Is it FTP? Is it SFTP? And then that will send the data to S3 or Amazon AFS, as the case may be. Okay. Um, I think it's also what you just saying. What so if I type transfer family, so that you know it's a thing, right? So um, it's here, for example. Um, so it's basically a fully managed AWS. Remember, if you go to the cloud, many of these things that you're going to be getting, are really managed service, right? So AWS Transfer Family simplifies migration of. You can see the protocols are specific, right? They are specific. So FTP, file transfer. Basically, if you want to transfer file in this case. But remember, the other one supported S3, EFS, and especially around the NFS and the SMB protocol. But here it's really FTP, right? So the way it works is also like you create a server, for example, and then that's where you choose which protocol you're going to be supporting, right? And then on the other end, you basically just need to connect to a given protocol using the more or less like the DNS that's given to you, and from there you just have an FTP and you can pretty much move your files. And I think I was mentioning that if you've ever hosted anything with any of these hosting providers, usually what they will give is they'll give you like your FTP connection, and then you use something like FileZilla, right? I don't know if that thing is still, but for example, it's just here. You can see it's like a free FTP solution, right? So it means that it's known. So if you, for example, if you were to implement this, once you set up your FTP server in AWS, if you have this kind of app, you basically just need to connect it to the FTP endpoint, and from that point, you can just push your files. So this is really FTP focused, okay? Yeah, that's really what you need to do. So it's also a way for you to transfer file, but this is specific to the FTP and the SFTP protocols, okay? Um, so one thing we'll now think about is that we've seen that people are already on premise, right? You want to move to the cloud, but there are people where they've kept so much data in on premise that now the transition to the cloud is going to take days. So here I did put like an estimate, like more or less like just like an estimate of how long it's going to take you, depending on your bandwidth, right? So how long it's going to take you to transfer a certain amount of file to AWS, how long it's going to take you. So when you think about it, imagine you want to transfer like 50 petabytes of data at an internet speed of 10 gigabits per second. It's still going to take you so many days to do that, right? So it just means that the internet speed that you have, regardless of the internet service provider, it has its limit. It has its limit when you want to deal with like when you want to do huge migration to the cloud. It has its limit. But AWS, you're not left out. AWS have you covered, and that's where I would introduce you to the Snow family. The idea is that if you have this very huge data on premise and you needed to move them to the cloud, without using more or less like DataSync, yeah, if it's too big for DataSync, or you don't want to use the FTP route, there is really the Snow family. And the idea is that it's really for moving of large data to the cloud. You've amassed so many terabytes, so many petabytes of data on your on-premise, but you want to move to the cloud. And there's no just easy way for you to do that. You need to more or less like reach out to AWS and onboard with one of their Snow options for you to move it, right? A lot of things have changed in the Snow family, which is part of what I'm going to be sharing to you. So this one is physical. You have to physically transfer the files. So you're basically getting something. And the good thing about this one is, remember, the last slide talked about how the internet could be a barrier, right? So this one is really offline. DataSync, for example, you still need to be connected. Internet has to be there, right? The other services, there's some sort of you need internet, but in this case, it's really offline transfer. You get something, you get a device from AWS, push in your file, and you return it back. That's the way it works. Okay, so petabyte scale data migration, offline data transfer, right? So basically, the data is offline, and then you need to move it to the cloud. And the use case is really large scale migration, right? So that's really one of the major use cases. So if you in your journey you see that as much as some things can be moved, 100 GB is no big deal. Some terabytes is no big deal. But once you start crossing petabytes of scale of data, then you know that if you want to use the internet speed, it's going to take long, and that's where Snow comes in. There's really nothing much to talk about in Snow, but you just need to understand that before there used to be Snow Cone. Snow Cone was like a small device that you could use, but it's retired. I'm just putting it here in case you ever see it in your exam or in anywhere. It's now retired. Snow Mobile 2 used to be like a truck, right? Because the way AWS did it is that they gave 3 options for you to move large data. Whether it's Snow Cone, depending on how much data you're moving, and then if your data was also large, you can go one level up and get a Snowball. And then if you were really talking about huge, massive data, that's when you go Snow Mobile, right? Snowmobile is actually a truck. It's a truck that could help you move your data to the cloud, right? But all that Snowmobile, Snowcone, they're all retired now, and now the focus is really on Snowmobile, Snowball Edge. Okay, that's really the emphasis. The idea is that if you want to transfer a lot of things that you could do with Snowmobile before, you can get a lot of Snowball Edge devices and then use that to move your files in chunks or in parallel, right? So remains the go-to option for hybrid. And remember, it's really more or less like if you're talking about large-scale migration, if you wanted to move your data from your current on-premise setup to the cloud. So what is now Snowball Edge is the next thing we'll be talking about. So Snowball Edge, basically, it gives you two options. Storage optimized, meaning basically for storage. So you can bring it, you can collect it from AWS, take it to your on-premise environment, push your files into it, return the device to AWS. That's one. But there is also an option for compute optimized, meaning you can use it to perform computation on premise, right? And it's useful for, like, if you wanted to do like edge computing, something that you needed to do in a remote environment, right? You can do computation there, and then you still have access to more or less like resync your data when the time comes, right? So you can use EC2 instances in those cases, right, for the edge computing there. And for the price, we obviously know that because you are getting a device from AWS, you're going to pay for the device itself, and then whatever charges comes from you using it daily. Okay, so edge location is one of the use cases. If you wanted to do computation on the edge, it's one of the reasons why you should use Snowball Edge. Okay, I'm just going to show you what that one looks like in the UI. So maybe before that, I'm also going to show you. So the use case, large scale migration. So large scale. So if I was asking you, for example, you wanted to move 10 GB, that can easily be handled by DataSync that we just saw, right? But if we were talking about petabyte scale of migration, right? And then you also have to start thinking about the number of days. You know, number one, getting the device from AWS, taking it to your own premise, you have to order it, it will take time to deliver the device for you. You have to load the data, you have to return it, right? So sometimes, again, you can also be thinking about how long it's going to take. That's usually sometimes how the questions are based on. Sometimes it's about how fast do you want the data to be moved, how big is the data, right? Snow Family is good for large data migration, but again, if you are time sensitive, sometimes maybe there is another option. But again, there are just some options that if you were to use DataSync, it's going to take so long, and the only option for you to use is just to use like a Snow Family, right? So edge computing, process your data at remote locations. Disaster recovery, you can basically get the device, back up your on-premise huge data, and return it back to the cloud, right? You can use this collect data from remote areas. That's the whole idea of the edge computing, right? IoT, we know IoT is also it is like Internet of Things. You can do that at the edge and gather those data and take it back to AWS. And especially when you connectivity, we've talked about it at the beginning. The issue is that if you have so many petabytes of data to move, internet is going to be a major barrier, right? So that's really one of the major use cases for you to do it. So let's see what it looks like in the UI, just so you know that you can also corroborate it with what I mentioned in terms of like the other ones that they've retired. So there's the Snow Family in AWS, right? And when you go to the Snow Family, for example, and you see you have to order the device, right? So you say, for example, local my local computation, for example, because we know we're going to be using it on our on-premise environment. Here is where you say, what are you going to be using the Snow mobile device for, or the Snow Family device for? Is it to import data? In this case, you know that you basically just want to more or less like just import data, right? You're not doing any computation. But there is also export. So it means you can actually get a device that your data from a bucket is loaded into the device and given to you, right? And then there is an option for you to do local compute and storage. It has both compute. It can have compute happen in it, and then it can also work for storage. So let's just say we want to import from S3. So you can see the only options that are here is really Snowball Edge, right? Optimized with blah, blah, blah. In this case, it's storage optimized, right? Because we're not going to be using it for compute. We just want to use it. We will order it from AWS. AWS is going to send it to us, and then we're just going to load that data and return it back, and they will do the integration. So basically, it's on-demand per day pricing, right? And then select the storage type. Yeah, S3 data transfer. You have to choose like a bucket, right? That the data is going to be moved to at the end of the day. Let's say I choose my bucket, I do next, blah, 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 and I do next. This is where I'm now just going to choose, it's very straightforward. You basically choose like your shipping, and give your shipping details, and then that is it. So if you go here, there's like a place, I think we've seen SNS before, you can create an SNS topic, you can subscribe to the SNS topic, for example, put your email, and you'll be notified, how things are progressing. You can put how many days, it may take up to 4 weeks before your device is ready to ship. So you can imagine, it depends. Sometimes, that's why I said, sometimes it's always about how fast do you want the data moved. Because for Snow Family, there's usually like a time constraint that is needed for you to get the device and then plan the migration, right? Moving the data. So, but again, it's the only solution if your data is really huge and you need to move it to the cloud. So But then after that time, you just create a job summary, and then in the console you can always monitor that job and see the progress. So it's not hard. It's just for your use case. So there's really nothing for us to do that else. We'll be creating like an order, which we don't want to do. Okay. So that one is straightforward, basically. It is, but just know that it's really for huge data migration. Like you're moving data completely from your on-premise. You're taking a device because you are limited by your internet, your the speed of your internet, and you're using this to just do like bypass that process, right? That brings us to an important topic when we think about your data is in the cloud, whether it's in S3. But one huge thing people do with S3, as you know, right? S3 is like a file storage. You keep pictures, you keep images, and you keep videos. And sometimes you want to deliver this content to your end users. Maybe your website is just a website. Maybe it's just it's also like a video streaming app and all that, right? So there's really usually like a huge requirement for more or less like content delivery, right? And there's a lot of challenge that comes with it. The fact is, your business, when you host your website, is hosted somewhere. The bucket is somewhere. It's like in a region, in a location, right? But your users are all over the world. They could be in India, they could be in Nigeria, they could be wherever they are around the world. So there is always this latency concern, right? Where somebody's in India and is trying to access a bucket or a solution that lives in the US, right? So there is always that challenge. And then when you think about it also, when you, so it means the distance you have from the region where the solution is would affect how fast you get the data, right? Network congestion is obviously one thing. The internet is a huge space. Data is moving here and there. Bandwidth, right? People obviously here in Canada, I stream. It's easy. People in some other countries, the internet might be slow. There could be challenge around that, right? And then obviously some security benefits that CDNs just give you automatically, like DDoS protection, security, all that you can just get them from, And so what's the solution? Content delivery networks, right? And that's the bet of CDN. So there's so many CDN solutions out there. Like I do mention, because it's focused on AWS, so we're going to be looking at what AWS does. And AWS has a solution for that, which is called CloudFront. What does CloudFront do? Basically, what CloudFront does is that it provides all the things that I just mentioned, the benefits that I just mentioned the slide before. The idea is really it's a global content delivery network. It has 400 plus points of presence in 90 plus cities. So what it means is that these points of presence are really edge locations, right? So regardless of where your data is, there is like an edge location closer to the user that the content can be served fast. That's just the idea. Okay, that's just the idea. The fact that the user is in Africa, your data is in the US, your files are in the US. The usual trouble that the person will have to go through the internet and do all that is taken away because AWS has so many edge locations that it can serve your data from in a very fast way. Okay, so and it supports so many origins, right? S3 would see it's one application load balancers, EC2, any HTTP endpoint server. Okay, like I said, most CDNs, there's so many of them there. Cloudflare, if you know Cloudflare is also like one of those options. DDoS protection, and then Shield. You can also put like AWS Shield on top of it. There's also WAF. You can integrate WAF. WAF is Web Application Firewall, right? So because if it's in front of your application load balancer, that's already a web application or it's like an application. So sometimes you want to put a firewall, sometimes you want to make sure you can withstand distributed denial of service, right? So all that is a thing. So when you think about it, how does it work? It's simple, and I did put a link if you wanted to go further. But the whole idea is that, like I said, your bucket is somewhere, right? It's a different continent, and you are in a different continent. Your user is in a different continent, and the user wants to get a bucket. And for that reason, instead of just going to the location, so usually at the first time of getting the data, it will go to the location and get it. But once it gets it, it puts it in a card, and that's what is called the edge location. And there are so many edge locations, so it means your edge locations are closer to you, the user, than the source, the original source, which is the origin in this case. So once it is there in the edge location, the next time the user is trying to get that same file, right? In as much as it does not change, it is returned from the edge location, and it makes it really, really fast. Honestly, it's hard enough for you to have like a website or application that you're not using it's sort of CDN on it. It doesn't work, and that's why it's a concept that you need to master and understand. Okay. So there are two major types of cache, okay, and I think it's part of the questions that I did ask. There's like a regional cache. They are not as much as the edge locations. The edge locations, they are more of that. Regional cache, the whole idea is just edge caches. They put data that are frequently, basically frequently. If you access data frequently, they'll be there because it's closer to the end user. But you still have like some regional cache, there are not a lot of them. And the thing is that if the data is in the edge cache, over time, as the popularity of that data reduces, it is moved to a regional cache. That's just the whole idea. So sometimes it's trying to get it from the edge location. If it's there, it returns it back to you. If it's not there, it checks the regional cache. If it's there, it returns it back to you. Then if it's not at the regional cache, that's when it goes to the origin, which is the server itself that has the result you're looking for. And I said from the last slide, it could be a bucket. It could be an HTTP server. It could be a load balancer, right? Um, so caches data and serves less frequently access content longer, right? So to reduce origin fetches and improve efficiency. That's basically what original cache do. So if what it also does is that over time it just promotes data that are not frequently accessed and moves them there, right? But these things play. So when you, I think from most part people use applications, but these things happen behind the scene that we don't really get to see. Okay. Um, so CloudFront origins, let's just quickly talk about them. There's really S3 static content. So we've seen how we host static content in S3. Now we can see how we can replay that with the CloudFront. ALB, NLB, C2, HTTP, HTTPS, I mean, all that are origins supported. Multiple origins, you can have multiple origins actually. You can say slash this route, go to my S3 bucket, slash this route, go to my load balancer, right? And you can even do failover also. So it has so many integrations. These are the ones. And then you can have security on top of it, whether it's DDoS protection, whether it's web application firewall on top of it, right? One key concept that you just need to know is the concept called origin access control, and is the fact that if you remember how we did public bucket, we created the bucket, we had to open it publicly for people to see, right? We'll see how that is solved with CloudFront, because what it does, what we can now do is that the same bucket that we have, just by not exposing it to the public, people can still see it with the help of CloudFront, even in addition to the CDN advantage it already gives us. The whole idea is that there is a special access that we can grant CloudFront for you to see the bucket, and no one else will be able to see the bucket directly unless going through CloudFront. That's just what it does. So whenever you see, and you see that a lot, but the whole idea is that origin access control is really a permission that is given to CloudFront to access your data, and without through CloudFront you can't access the S3. That's just what it means. So you see your data is in the public, but actually you can't directly reach the bucket. And then there is like WAF, right? Web application firewall. You can apply that on top of your CloudFront if you wanted. You can also do geo restriction. So you can block like a country completely and say, this country, if they try to open my application, let it not open. And then there's like signed URLs, right? So time-based, more or less like time-limited access to private content. In S3, we didn't talk about pre-signed URL, but we'll see it at some point. The whole idea is that you can actually keep a bucket that is private. You can generate a pre-signed URL for it and send that URL to someone, and someone will be able to download the file. The same applies to CloudFront. You can actually generate a signed URL that someone can use to see a content, right? So when you now think about it, what is it? Let's compare CloudFront and if you think about CloudFront versus S3 cross-region replication. If you remember, we did that at some point, right? Don't confuse them. One is really global, right? Purpose is really CDN, so global content delivery. The other one is to just replicate data, right? TTL is there for CloudFront, right? Because the data sometimes is cached in the CDN such that when the user is accessing it, it's so fast because it's already there and it's not changing, right? The other one is real-time, near real-time replication. One is static content, delivery from all the edge locations. The second one is really disaster recovery, trying to keep compliance, saying that you need to keep a backup somewhere, right? One has edge locations for fast access. The other one is really a replica, whether it's in your account or it's a cross-region replica, just a replica of your data, right? And then the way it works is that for this one, you pay for the request and the data transfer. Why this one, you pay for the storage, because it's like you are duplicating your storage, right? Two direction. It's here, you're replicating it here. So you're paying for the replication as well as the space the data is going to be taken where it is going to. Okay. And I think this brings us to a demo. So let's look at CloudFront. I think I've introduced you to what it looks like. So let's go back to the bucket we've been working with. So I'll just look for S3. Go to S3 here, and then we'll look for our old buckets. And I'll just check around the bucket first just to make sure that it's clean. If you remember, it's on GitHub, so you can see all these same files that is here if you wanted to do it yourself. It's basically all I have is an index.html file. I have an error.html file just to catch the error. Then I have like an image here that is machine learning associates.png image, right? And it's displayed from this index.html. If I go to the permission, I know as part of the last class, I added like a permission, but now because of this class, I have removed the, I think I should go to permission is where I'm going to. So right now it's plain, no permission at all. I've removed it, right? Access point also in the class you saw there was access point. I've taken that completely out. So there is nothing. Management, there's even no replication rule again. So everything I've been, so think about it, just blank S3 bucket that has my content, right? So if I was to now create a CDN, remember right now, there's nothing I can do. Also, remember also as part of properties, we had like a place where we did static website hosting. Also, I've disabled it. So it's off. Right now, there's no way you can see this bucket from the outside world. There's no way right now. So with that being the case, that's a good use of CloudFront. So we can now go to CloudFront because this is a website. I want it to be public. So CloudFront, I need it to be public. So because I want it to be public, I should use CloudFront. That's like a good way to do it. So if you think about it, this is like the new UI. This, the one that I'm looking at, is the new UI. We probably will try to do it from the old UI. But again, honestly, a lot might have changed. Maybe we'll try it with the new UI and try with the old UI, just to tell you some of the basic things that you need to keep track of. But the whole idea is that I called it my web, more or less like my web application that I want to deploy. I call it my test web application, right? And then here I'm saying is a single website or app that I'm hosting. Domain, here you can specify a custom domain if you wanted. In my own case, I don't need. I want to just use whatever is given to me by CDN. So like I said, I was telling you about origin, meaning the data, people will see it faster because it's already at the cache location, edge locations, but it is coming from an origin. It's coming from somewhere. So here is just like a room for me to be able to add which origin. There's Elastic Load Balancer, API Gateway, VPC, so you can connect to things that are inside the VPC, all that, right? Here I'm just going to use S3. I need to browse where the bucket is. So I have to browse, this is my bucket, I'll choose it. This you have to be careful about this one, because what this thing means is that if I put anything here, it just means that it's going to append that path for anytime it's trying to call your origin, right? So you have to be careful. And sometimes some people have maybe like an API gateway that already has like a /prod or /dev. So that's like a good use case for you to do /dev, because anytime it's calling your API gateway, it's going to put this path to it. Okay, we'll see all that as time goes on. So, but because it's S3 bucket in this case, you have to know, you don't need to put anything, no path. Now this is where allow private S3 access to CloudFront. This is where it becomes important, right? If you remember, I was talking about the access policy that is needed for CloudFront to talk to your bucket, and really this is where it is done, right? If I disable this, I have to manage that myself, but it's better I just allow it so that the policy is created. But we're going to see what that policy looks like. Origin settings, use recommended settings for now. I'm not going to touch that one. I don't need a firewall. This is where you could add like an application firewall if you wanted, but I'm not going to use it. I'm just saying do not enable security permissions for now. Okay, so I'll go to next. Let me see if there is something I can do. Origin. So this is where it's a bit different from how the old UI used to work, but let's just create the distribution. So we're creating a distribution. It's going to take some time to create, okay? But the whole idea is that we've created. So while it is creating, let's go back to our S3 bucket. We were here before and we looked at the permission, there was nothing, right? So there was nothing before, but one thing you will notice that this has now been added to my bucket. So this is very important, because every time the exam tests you around what do you call it, policy of CloudFront to bucket, this is really what it's asking for. Because now the bucket is, I didn't have a policy attached, but now there is now a bucket, a policy that says allow CloudFront. Basically, it's just, I think this policy is not new to us. The principal is a service, and the service is CloudFront. The resource is my bucket, right? So the resource, that's really my bucket. And then the source ARN, if you go and check this, is actually the ARN of the CDN. So the source ARN should match this. So in as much as this is matched, return the object. Other than that, nobody else can see this bucket. So this bucket is still safe. The only way you can see it is through CloudFront. If the data is not given to CloudFront, you're not going to get it. So that's just one thing you need to keep track of. Okay, so why this is also creating, if I go here on the right, you see that if I scroll down, origin access, you see that I think, I'm not sure which one is creating now. So let me just go to distributions on the side and then look for the one which is 160, right? So this is the one creating. Let me see. I don't know if is that the new one has not created. There's usually supposed to be a new one that talks about the origin. Let me see if there is created by who. Let's give it time. It looks like maybe it's not. It hasn't created, but by now it should have. But if you go into the origin, for example, and you try to edit it, yeah, you can see. You can see you must allow access to CloudFront using this policy statement. So what it means is I can even come here and copy the policy. So if I copy it here, let me do this. So let's do this. If I paste this content, right, this one, this is exactly what was written. That's just what it's saying. That it's telling us here that it has written it automatically, but it's also saying that you have to add this to the bucket policy, right? Because it created an origin access control on our behalf. And then the policy, he added it. But in some case, if it wasn't added, just copy it from here. I'm going to update the bucket policy and you have it. So when I pasted it here, you can see that's the content showing. This is exactly what was added to CloudFront, and that's good. So let's go back to our distribution and see it's enabled. It's still deploying. It usually takes time. Remember, CloudFront will it's like deploying it across the edge locations, right? It's an S3 bucket. This S3 bucket is in US West 2, right? But the whole idea is to make sure that the experience is similar, even if someone is accessing from Africa or India or wherever, Pacific, wherever they are, the experience should be the same or it should be similar. So it's still deploying, so we're going to give it time. And if we go back here, you see it's still, the permissions are still, is basically that one. If we go to the properties of the object, there is still no static website open for that bucket. So it's still the same bucket, and it's just with our objects, right? The same objects that we have. So let's see. Let me see if this one is still deploying. Let's give it time. I think I'll just copy this URL and try to test it here. Okay, so I'm just going to paste it here. It's still loading. Let's believe that it's still loading. But there, okay, let me try something. Index.html. Oh no, that's not what I'm looking for. HTML. Okay, cool. So it's still deploying, but I could actually access it. I don't know how many of you can see it clearly. I don't know if you can see this browser, but I can actually. So I can access it. So this is the same website that we did show for S3, right? We did like public website from S3, and we saw this same page, right? But we can also see it. But if you notice, I had to go here and type index.html for it to work. So it means something is not right. So I probably will need to go back to the distribution. Let me see. It's still deploying. So there's really no room right now for me to, let's see, edit the settings. So if you remember here, I had to go and do /index.html for it to work as expected. But ideally, if I already have like my root page, right, I can just put index.html as my root, my home page, right? By then I don't need to put that extra URL again. So if I go back to this and I go back like, yeah, it's still going to take time because it has to deploy basically. Right now, it hasn't pushed that change just yet, so we'll give it some time. But right now, it's still available. We can access it just using /index.html. Okay, so let's give it some time. And so if I go back again, while that one is building, I'm going to give it some time to build. So let's look at the old UI because this UI is changed often. Okay, so if I was to create it using the old UI, what is it going to look like? So this is the old experience. What we use just now is the old experience. If I was to create this in the new experience, this way it asks me, if you notice the UI presented is different. Here it is asking me for which bucket, which elastic load balancer. It knows there is none, no API gateway, no VPC origin identified. So I'm just going to use my bucket, right? I'm going to create my bucket, use my bucket. Origin path, I've told you the reason you shouldn't use origin path because it just means every time CloudFront is trying to reach origin, it's going to append an origin path to it. So we don't need it. The name, enter the name of this origin. I don't know. I'm just going to take the default. Origin access recommended for us to use this, right? So origin access control settings, that's really the recommended way of connecting CloudFront to this. And if I click here, I can create a new one, right? But there are some that already exist in my account that I can basically just reuse. So if you've created it before, you can always reuse it. So CloudFront will provide you with the policy statement after creating the distribution. It's the same, right? It's going to create it. So enable origin shield, I don't need it. Additional settings, I can leave those ones. I can leave all this. HTTP will redirect to HTTPS. That's exactly what we want. I will leave all these to default. Additional settings, I can expand it and check. There's nothing significant that I need to change. I don't need to enable WAF here. So I think in the former UI, you basically could do everything at a go somehow. But in the new UI, I think they've broken all that out. You just they give you like the minimum settings for you to create the CloudFront, and you can go back and edit it if you wanted. So here I can see the price class, all that. We'll talk about that at some point. So you can also go back here and choose a certificate if you have your own at the end of the day, it's not going to use, if you were to host this, it's not going to use like this, the CloudFront domain. It's going to use your own domain, and you would have bought a certificate for that domain. And this way you can supply it such that someone goes to brainyl.com, they will see my website, but it will be using my own brainyl.com certificate. All that is doable, right? This is where I would have specified index.html, right? But in the other place, there was no way I could specify it. I could have specified it here. IPv6 is on, could be off if I wanted. Log delivery, if I wanted to keep the log in CloudWatch, S3 or Firehose. Right now, I think it's off, but I can enable it. So I'm just showing you the old experience, but the most important thing is whether I use the old experience or the new experience, just take note of the things that you need to keep an eye on, at least to have like a basic website loading for you. So one of the most important things, you need to really supply an index.html page, and then you need to choose which origin are you connecting to. But we already have a distribution. There's no point creating an extra one. Let me go back to this distribution, refresh it, and see that it has deployed. So it's not deploying again. Let me try and go back and see if it's going to load. Now you can see because that time it was deploying, but now it's fully deployed. So now the home page is going to give you the home page of the, and I know there's an error.html file, right? So if I do error, basically error.html, is it going to load it? It is. Now, if you remember, this is the error page, right? And if you check that folder too, I think there's like a dev slash whatever it's called, maybe replicated.csv. Let's try if that one is also going to work. But the whole idea is just going to serve your static replicated.csv, right? So CSV. yeah, it has downloaded it, so you can see it's downloaded. All this is happening from the edge location. So it's like your bucket. Your bucket is like your web. So if you were ever thinking of hosting like your static website or something that talks about you, CloudFront is really one of those solutions. Throw your files inside your S3 bucket and just have it loaded, basically, and you should be good to go. So I'm just going to leave this here, and then we can, I think, yeah. So I think we've talked about CloudFront versus cross-site, cross S3 cross-region replication. Okay. So at this point, I think it's a good segue for us to yeah, a good segue for us to continue the class next time, so that the recording will not be too long. Okay.